ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage Mr. Serge de Gheldere. Microphone is working? Yes, normally.
Yeah?
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Yes. Well, I think
afternoon.
that the first speaker, Serge, bedankt om hier te zijn. Merci d'être avec nous, ça fait plaisir de se revoir. I think the first speaker said when we're talking about climate change, it's a matter first of cultural change of mindset.
Mindset, yeah.
I think that was a good introduction.
Absolutely. I believe it's an incredible risk we're facing, but if we see it as an opportunity, it can benefit to all of us, and that's what I hope to
50
show.
minutes?
Yeah.
Okay for you?
All right.
Thank you very much, Serge.
Let's do it. Good afternoon. Well, let's dive right into it. I have a short part talking about climate change and what's happening and how it's actually happening much faster and much worse than we think. But I want to spend the most of my talk about 4 ways to actually turn this challenge into an incredible business opportunity. Because I believe that climate change is one of the, or maybe arguably the biggest business opportunity that we're facing. And there will be winners and losers amongst companies, amongst nations. Those who see it as an opportunity will become the new Apples and Googles and Teslas. The others will become the next Kodaks. And that's what I'm going to talk about. First, maybe this slide, maybe you've seen it before. Every year, the World Economic Forum, you know, it's the group of most powerful politicians, corporate CEOs, etc., who gather in Davos. And they publish a report every year. And I'm going to zoom in into it. It's the Risk Outlook report. And on the horizontal axis, you have the probability of risks occurring. This is very high probability. This is low probability. On the vertical axis, you have the severity, the impact within the 10 next years on the global economy. And I want to show it because it's quite striking to see that for the World Economic Forum, and it's not Greenpeace, it's not WWF, it's hardcore economists and politicians. You see there, top right, extreme weather event, natural disasters, and failure to adapt to climate change and to mitigate climate change sources. This is one of the most severe risks that they think we are facing. It's actually on par of weapons with weapons of mass destruction. And that's really the kind of impact that you need to bear in mind when we talk about this. It's not an environmental problem, climate change, not at all. It will disrupt all layers of economy and of society as we know it. It's been going on for a long time, so it's not something that will happen in the future. It's been happening in the past for decades and decades. We can measure it, we can see it. And when we look at the causes, actually, this is a really brilliant animation from the Bloomberg from a couple of years ago, actually when it was the Paris conference. They tried to map all the misconceptions that people may have about climate change. And this is what we observe, so the temperature rising. And then some people say, yeah, but it's maybe just because of the natural oscillation of our planet, or the change in the solar output, or other factors, maybe volcanoes or other aspects that impact it. And when you map that all out, actually you see that it has very little effect on what we actually measure. So maybe it's something else. It's our use of our land, etc. And again, here, when you map it out, you see that these things have an influence, but they don't add up to what we see to an observed temperature. And so the final conclusion is there's no doubt anymore about the fact that it's greenhouse gases that we emit, and we just keep adding them to the atmosphere. They are active for 120 years or more. And when we add everything up, it's very, very closely mapped to what we measure. So there's, amongst the scientific community, amongst the CEOs and leaders of the world, even the CEO of Shell, who's now the Minister of State, Rex Tillerson in the United States, asked Trump, not to step out of the climate agreement. So there's no doubt about what we're seeing. And the effect of it, and just to give you an image, the effect of the heat that we're building up corresponds to Hiroshima bombs, 400,000 of them every day. That's the kind of heat that we're trapping. This, 400,000 times every day. When you talk about warming, this is the heat, the warmth that we're adding to our planet. And most of that heat is actually not visible, because most of it is trapped in the oceans. So what we measure on land and in the atmosphere is just a tiny, it's 7% almost. All the rest goes to the oceans. It's like, how do you call it, a bouillotte. When you heat water, it actually absorbs that water very much. So there's a big problem there, because what we're seeing in terms of observed temperature is literally only the tip of the iceberg. And I want to briefly show some consequences. I can speak about this for a long time, and it will all depress you, but just briefly indicating some of the things we've seen. For instance, warmer oceans create more evaporation and actually heat up and make storms more powerful. So the storms we've seen everywhere, these storms have been there for, forever. But now with more evaporation, with more heat, they become much more powerful. And this is an effect we're seeing all over the world. Also, with more evaporation, we see that these kind of phenomenon, it's the precipitation that happens in a very short time leads to incredible storms like that are full of mass of water, and that in a very short period of time can turn into precipitation. And everywhere around the world, whether it's in Paris or Spain or Latin America, we see these kind of things. This is a couple of years ago. You remember the images. One image that particularly struck me was this one, where it's business as usual for the woman, cleaning her windows for her cafe. So this is the kind of change we're looking at close by. We're seeing other things that are maybe more abstract, Greenland, North Pole, South Pole, all of that. But when we talk about sea level rise, this is what it is. This is literally sea level rise in the making. It's ice, Greenland, where you have rivers of melting water that actually go into a very deep hole, which is like a vertical river of 3 kilometers, and then will end up in the seas, leading to sea level rise. And this is actually something, again, it's not for the future, it's happening now. We see communities around the world on low-lying islands around the world who already now have to start preparing to move. These are the first climate refugees that need to look for other places to live, and that are starting to protect themselves. And most of the time, these people are, have a very hard time economically and have to improvise. You see here the walls they're trying to make with leftover oil drums and improvising with a bit of concrete. They have to start protecting themselves to the rising sea levels. The thing is, when we look at the map of the world, historically, where did people settle? In the ports. And so half of the world's population is in the globe's metropolises, who are often situated around at the seashore and coastal areas. Here, Shanghai, for instance, if we go to 2 degrees global warming, this is what it would look like. 4 degrees would be even more catastrophic. And nations around the world have the same kind of concentration of metropolises at the sea. If it were to happen to New York, and it already did with the Sandy storm, it would mean also an incredible economic loss. Now, for us, there's observed changes, and the same kind of things happen. It's not I don't need to elaborate on that with low-lying countries like us. we are looking at that. But it's not just these changes. It's not just the storms or the heavy weather or the sea level rise that we're worried about. We're worried about a tipping point. We're worried that climate change will set in motion something that we cannot stop, something that we cannot reverse. And last week there was a letter signed by 15,000 scientists who urge us again to take this seriously. Because otherwise we could say, you know what, we have all these problems now, let's take a break, we'll come back in 10 or 15 years, then we'll have solved all the Brexits and the Europe disintegrating and all of that, financial turmoil, and then this will be solved, and then we'll take climate change seriously and we'll have cheap solar panels to do so. But when you see these kind of things, when you see the fact that the North Pole, for instance, can disappear. I'm going to run it again, sorry, to explain what you see here. Why do you think this is an issue? It's not a rhetorical question. Does anybody know? Why is it an issue that we're losing the North Pole ice? Any idea? Yeah? Just shout.
The reflection of the sunlight.
Exactly. Because most people say, yeah, it's going to lead to sea level rise. No, this ice is actually already floating in the water, so the weight is already taken into account, but it's like a huge air conditioning for our planet. And as it decreases, there's less and less reflection, so our cooling decreases, so there's more and more heat being accumulated there, so the melting accelerates. And this is an issue because around the North Pole area, there's permafrost, permanently frozen ground in Alaska and Siberia, which contains huge amount of dead plants and organic matter. And when this melts, it's like if you were to pull the plug of your deep freezer and go on vacation for 3 days or 3 weeks, this is what would happen. Processes that release methane, which is an even more powerful greenhouse gas. So we have a number of these things, we call them positive feedback loops, that can reinforce themselves, and actually once we set these in motion, it's very, very hard to stop them, if not impossible. Okay, I'm going to skip a couple of slides here, because I'm taking a bit too much time. So, on the other side, and I wanted to make the link to, yeah, thank you, to climate on the one hand, so our goal there is to move off of fossil fuels to power our economy. On the other hand, we have a huge issue with resources. Our economy is so dependent on resources. And this is the theme of this afternoon, looking at what we do with the second life of tires and how this can be used as a resource in our economy. But it's not only these kind of resources. When you look at all the minerals and building materials, fossil fuels, biomass, our consumption has just exploded. And like Thomas Rowe said, we're consuming it. We're not guardians of this material. We're not taking care of it as if it's something with unlimited supply as a closed system. We're taking it, we're making something from it, and we're wasting it. We're just consuming it instead of using it. And so there's a huge challenge worldwide, not only to move off of fossil fuels, but also to move to completely circular economy, to continue creating the wealth and the services that we have, but to completely rethink how we can do that in terms of materials. When we look at the quantities that we're trading worldwide and the precious resources that are disappearing at an alarming rate, it's a very big challenge. On the other hand, also just the fact that most of this waste is not even turned purely into energy or belts, but we are actually destroying our natural environment. This is an artistic rendering of the plastic soup we have in the Pacific Ocean. And this is killing our living systems as well. So it's not just we don't have the resources anymore and we need to improve our productivity, but also where is it going to? It's destroying our natural system, or it's being added to our atmosphere as a greenhouse gas. So that's for the introduction. I think it's pretty clear to most of us that we have an incredible challenge ahead of us. But the good news is, 2 years ago, exactly 2 years ago, the world came together. And in terms of climate change, it's quite an achievement. It's not enough, not nearly enough, again, like Thomas Rock pointed out. But it's an incredible achievement that the world came together and agreed on something that's more or less equivalent to the Declaration of Human Rights. So this is a monumental moment, and what was agreed to is economically and technically feasible in terms of goals. It's going to be hard, and when we look at what we need to do, the blue lines there, and what the nations have put forward as their homework, the orange lines, we see that there's still a very big gap. We agreed in Paris that we would aim for 1.5, maximum 2 degrees by the end of the century. And when we look at, all the propositions, including Belgium, European Union, who did their homework and said, yeah, we're going to do this and this, still a big gap to fill there. There's a professor, I'm sorry, Johan Rockström, he's a Swedish guy. He said, yeah, it's so complex, all these percentages, and people completely lose track of what is enough and not enough. And he looked at all the science, and he tried to come up with something very simple, a bit like the Moore's Law. Everybody knows Moore's Law, and that a computer chip every 18 months will double its capacity or processing power for the same cost. We're not on the Moore's Law anymore for the moment because it's harder and harder. But this notion that we need disruptive change, exponential change, he tried to fit that into a very simple and easy to remember law. And his law is, for emissions, every 10 years, every decade, we will need to halve our emissions. At the same time, for renewable energy, every 5 years, we need to double the capacity of renewable energy. And, because just reducing and moving off our fossil fuels will not be enough, we need to build, and that's this lowest line here, we need to build a carbon sink. We need to start reforesting, creating systems that can absorb CO2 and lock it, so that we have 5 million tons of CO2 capture additionally by 2050. So 3 things. Every 10 years, reduce by half our emissions. Every 5 years, double the amount of the quantity of renewables, and by 2050, have 5 billion tons of CO2 removal through afforestation and other projects. And when we look at Belgium and others, we actually, already years ago, in 2013, we had a roadmap presented by then State Secretary Wathelet, which was pretty close to that goal, actually. It was quite ambitious. They set really ambitious target. They said we need to reduce by 5% per year. All good things. There's a whole website explaining how we would do that, in what sector we need to make what changes. And the main thing was, not only did this incredibly elaborate report describe how to do it, but they said, not only can we do it, but this analysis demonstrates that a low-carbon economy can lead to reduction of total system costs, because additional investment costs will be compensated by lower fuel costs. So they say, this is what we need to do, this is how we can do it, and it's going to be financially attractive. And so when I saw this report 4 years ago, I thought, yes, we're going to be a pioneering nation, and this is the start of a revolution in Belgium. But when we look at what really happens, is again, we have good plans, but they're not being implemented. And there's a lot of reasons why it's not happening as fast as we need to do. Change is hard, again, like Thomas Rowe saw. But I think one of the main reasons is also this mind shift, is that we think we need to do this because of Paris, or because of Al Gore, or because of the polar bears, that we are obliged to do it, and it's already so hard. if only we wanted to do this, if only we said, wow, this is an incredible opportunity, why would I wait? I can cut costs, or I can target a new market, or I can anticipate risks. Why? And if we would just change the lens through which we look at this challenge and see it as an opportunity, I think we would move much, much faster than we currently do. And there's an incredible number of opportunities. This is again from the World Economic Forum. They have, if you have some time, you should really check this out. This is what they call the transformation maps, in which you see how all the challenges that we're facing are actually incredibly interlinked. It's not one thing you can isolate. But by doing so, we can create jobs, we can strengthen our economy, we can become less dependent of energy imports that go to Russia and to Middle East, all of that. And they describe it, the whole systems view is really well described. Unfortunately, what happens with most companies for the moment when you talk about climate change is that they have a sustainability department. They say, okay, oops, is it working? Yeah. We're going to do some offsetting, maybe. A phone call, that's not nice. We're going to do some offsetting, or have maybe an eco line of some eco products in our offering. Maybe buy 10 hybrid cars for the management team and publish it in a nice sustainability report and say that we're doing good things. And that's business as usual. Yeah, there's something to be said. In Dutch we say, alle kleine bitches helpen. I don't believe that, it's choose your battles. You can do a bit here and there, but you're really missing out if this is your approach on sustainability. And don't take it from me, Take it maybe from our biggest economic threat for the moment. When you look at how China just reinvented itself in the last 5 years in terms of sustainability. I know Bob for since a long time, and we used to always have in presentations, China is a bad example. Why would I need to change my process? Why would I need to switch to solar panels if China opens a new coal-fired power plant every year, blah, blah, blah. It used to be the classic good excuse for inaction. Now, we had better wake up, because they are completely trashing the rest of the world when it comes to the speed with which they're moving off of fossil fuels and massively investing in everything sustainable. They have the advantage of having a central authority, so it's easy to say, Beijing, Chengdu, no more gas-powered scooters. 1 month later, it's the case. They can shut down coal-fired power plants. Last year they shut down 29. They can completely decide which way they're going. But this is something we should bear in mind. And I want to hopefully inspire you to think about what you can do in your own company. And I have reduced it to a very simple quadrant that we took from the book from Dan Esty, Green to Gold. A book that he published a long time ago, but we're still using that framework because it's really simple but really good. And I want to show some examples. If you don't decide to go for the business as usual, but if you want to really reinvent your company and not become the next dinosaur, I think there are 4 benefits that you can go after. The first is the most evident, right? Is reducing your costs by using less materials, by using less energy to deliver better products and services. It's just plain, simple, good management, good business thinking. And I want to show a couple of examples, not very elaborate, but examples that I really like. There's going to be much more talk this afternoon about circular economy, etc. But this is a framework I really like. It's from a Dutch scientist who said, yeah, all these cradle to cradle and other schemes, etc., when you look at it and all the possibilities, actually they always boil down to 3 things you can do to move to a circular economy. The first one is narrow your flows. So using less material, using less energy to deliver the same products and services. The second is exactly what Thomas Rowe was talking about. All of a sudden, Philips can deliver a 125,000-hour lamp. That's strange, because now they pay the bill. So there's a way of extending the primary life cycle of products, if we can. And the last one is really closing it. But if you close without having done the other two first, you miss a lot of opportunities. And for the first one, I want to show one example that's a very old example, but I really think it's still such a clever approach of a very boring problem that you may have encountered in your companies, is from Interface, people who make carpet tiles. And for years, they just, when they built a new plant, they took the previous design, they adapted it to the region in which they would build the plant, and then they fine-tuned it a bit. But what they did here, it was actually two engineers, Jan Schilham, a Dutch engineer, and Eng Lee Lok, a Korean engineer, that sat together and said, instead of building the building and then fitting our pipes with transitions from large to narrow and T-junctions and all of kind of corners and etc., let's do it in the opposite sense. Let's look at what we need to do to run our business, producing polyamide, so nylon fiber to create our yarn, and let's try to make that as efficient as possible. And so they did a couple of simple things. Hopefully my slide is following. Let's see. Oops, there's something with the build-up here. Okay, sorry for that. For the pipelines, they chose much larger diameter and straighter sections with less and shorter turns, and they built the building around it. So first they built their process, and then they accommodated the building around it. And you would say, yeah, but it's much more expensive if they have this to do it like that. But by doing so, the most expensive element of their process, the pumps and the engines, the motors that they need to drive those pumps, they could dramatically reduce the number of pumps that they needed, because the friction needed to pump those liquids was dramatically reduced. And so two things happened. On the one hand, they had a factor 10 reduction of their production cost, 93% saved. But they did so in a way in which the building of this plant was cheaper. So not only do they save the operational cost, but they do so at a lower capital expense by doing the right things in the right sequence. And from then on, all the buildings, all the plants for Interface were built in exactly the same way. Another example which grew more organically is what happens in Kalundborg. It's an industrial cluster in Denmark, which over the last 4 decades grew to what we call an industrial symbiosis. Just like symbiosis in nature, where one organism profits from the other, also here, as it grew over the years and decades, it became a whole cluster in which the waste of one company became the raw material of the company next to it. And it started with very simple exchange in water and heat and ash and ethanol, etc. But then it became this cluster which had this as guiding principle for the development. And by doing so, they had an incredible amount of savings, savings in money, 80 million for a handful of companies. It's not earth-shattering, but it's real money anyway. But also almost the emissions of a small town saved in terms of CO2 emissions. And hundreds of thousands of tons of raw materials not being wasted. And they don't call it waste anymore, they call it actually resources. And the connections, it's not with a truck going from one to the other, it's really physical connections between the plants that are on this side. And now people from all over the world actually come to Kallenberg to visit this and see how this can be mimicked. A more simple and maybe banal example, but I like it. It's a company we worked with, to be fully disclosed here. SMAPI, it's a Belgian company, you may have heard of it, and they have a very simple system in which you can measure your energy consumption in real time, but it's like Shazam. You know Shazam, the app? You hear a song, and your iPhone will tell you what song it is. Here, it does the same thing. It actually listens to the electric signal and will detect whether it's a pump or a heating installation or the air conditioning or the charging of your car that starts. And over time, it will learn and become more intelligent. And you get a bill, a utility bill, in which you say, this week your car cost you so much, or you have this amount of consumption at night from your fridge or whatever. Is that normal? And so just by looking at it in a new way, without changing any lights or production processes or compressors, people can save incredible amounts. They did tests, it's been documented extensively, and just by having this feedback loop, you can dramatically cut costs. Enhanced billing is the most simple one. You get a bill in which you have a detail of your use, etc., estimated feedback, etc. And the best one is here, where you get real-time info, which breaks down to appliance level what it is. You can save up to 12% by doing nothing. So on top of that, you can afterwards start investment programs to replace the most costly appliances, etc. But just by seeing differently, you can dramatically improve it. We did this. This is one of our side projects, Futureproofed Cities. I'm not going to talk about it long. It's a platform for smart cities. And we help cities actually draw up climate plans. And we have actually the same kind of, let me skip this, the same kind of experience when we map all the possible measures that a city can help do in order to reduce their climate impact. And we look at the total cost of ownership. So we look at all the investments needed and all the savings that we make for all the cities we work with for the moment, 16 cities here in Belgium and Breda. It's almost always the same story. Going for ambitious climate actions can save tens of millions of euros in the next coming 10 years or so for cities and for citizens. So this idea that it's only going to cost us more is a totally erroneous idea. And this should be the first place you start. Where can we save materials? Where can we save energy? And by doing so, how can we be better off financially? The second one is a bit more abstract. It's a bit more longer term. Is anticipating risks. And there are all kinds of risks. There's a risk that legislation will take place, that there's going to be a CO2 tax or something like that. And I'm going to talk about a couple of those risks. I'm going to have to speed up. I see here I'm 10 minutes slower than expected. So this is a graph I really like. I don't know if you know the International Energy Agency. You've maybe heard of it. Every year they publish the World Energy Outlook report, and they say this is what the energy world will look like in the coming years. And when they looked at the installed capacity of solar PV in the world years ago, old reports, but you see, this was their prognosis. When you look at what happened in reality, you can say that they were kind of off with their prognosis. And this is a risk. This is a risk because people will take investment decisions based on these results. They will say, okay, yeah, you know, these electric cars or the wind or this or that, it's not going that fast. Look, the experts tell us that. And then the reality is that it just explodes. And it's actually almost predictable. This is what Bloomberg, again, publishes. They call this a learning rate because it's double exponential, double logarithmic. For every doubling of the installed capacity in wind or PV, the per unit price, per kilowatt hour price will go down by a predictable amount. And here it's They used to think it's 26, now they realize it's 28. So every time the world installs additional capacity, the per unit cost will go down. And you can start taking that into account and realizing that the moment in which renewables will become cheaper than just fossil-based energy is just around the corner. And they have, again, you can download all of this. It's fantastic material. When you look at it, wind is already beating coal when it goes for new installation, coal and the gas cycle turbine. And it's just the story that we see happening all over, that renewables, not only we need to move to them, but more and more everywhere around the world, they become the cheapest form of energy. And we expect that by the end of the 30s, they will beat all form of other installed energy, just economically driven, regardless of the laws, etc., that we choose. Okay, another aspect, and maybe this is something a bit dense, but I still want to briefly touch on it. Has anybody heard about the carbon bubble in the room? No? Actually, I'm going to switch one slide here and ask you if anybody has seen the movie or read the book, The Big Short. Anybody? Yes, a couple of people. The Big Short is based on reality. It's based on a handful of people in Wall Street who saw the 2007 housing bubble come and who bet against the market. And what we're having now is a situation which is a bit the same like The Big Short. This guy, again, not Greenpeace, he's the head of the central bank in the UK, and he says, if we are serious about those 2-degree targets, if we are serious about that, this would mean that the vast majority of oil and gas and coal reserves would be stranded. They would be unusable. And that the value of the companies who work with this, Exxons and Shells and Totals, but also transportation companies and all other companies, the value of those companies who are still very much fossil-based is actually linked to how much of this reserve they can extract and sell. And all of a sudden now the world has agreed that we want to stick to a 2-degree or even a 1.5-degree target. And it means that most of the reserves will be unburnable. That's a calculation in which they look at how much CO2 is in the mines and the fields that we are using for the moment. If we all extract that and we burn it, how much will we add? 940 billion tons of CO2. But how much can we add if we're serious about Paris? Well, if it's 1.5, we can add 350. And if it's 2 degrees, we can add 800. So in both cases, it means that the currently being used mines cannot completely be mined and sold. And the valuation of a company who's in that business with respect to the real value, there's a big gap. And that's exactly what led to the subprime housing crisis in 2007. So we have the same kind of situation in which the world's largest corporations say, but we have fossil fuels for many, many decades. Don't worry, our stock price is justified. The loans that we take with the banks, we have a lot of leverage. We are a solid company. And all of a sudden you realize that these companies may be worth nothing almost, if we're serious about climate change. So it's a risk to take into account, and we see, that we call this stranded assets. We see them all around us. What will happen of all of this? Will this become, just a remembrance to our past? Okay. Last example when I talk about risks is the risk of missing an opportunity. And this is from 2 years ago. Just over 2 years ago, January 2015, in which Volvo said, we have an electric car, but there's just no market for it. And I I found that such an incredible statement. I've been using these slides ever since because, you know, not long after that, what happened, we see this happening, of course. We see that all around the world, 110,000 people stood in line for hours, I included, to put down €1,000 for a car they had never seen and that wouldn't be on the market for another 2 years. This happened. And then saying there's no market for electric cars. The car, of course, you know which one it is. Model 3 by Tesla. They have issues and problems building it to the scale that they need. But once they get there, they will get there. Once they get there, you know, it's going to be a very, very different market. And so, luckily, Volvo realized that maybe it's changing. Maybe it's changed. We have to recognize that Tesla has managed to offer such a car for which people are lining up. In this area, there should also be space for us with high quality and attractive design. And they did well, I think, because not much later they said that they would ditch all the diesels, etc. So it's happening, but there's a real risk there. This I saw today. Porsche also, because they're massive. He's saying we may be losing a couple of customers to Tesla. No. They're massively losing. All the buyers of the four-door Porsche are actually switching to Model S's, etc. So that's an incredible risk, and we've seen that risk over and over before. I don't need to explain a lot about this, but not many people know that Kodak actually had the first patents for digital photography in '72. And a couple of years ago, they went broke. Why? And I know a guy who was in that team of the first digital camera. I used to work at Baxter before. He was in that team. And he said, this is the future of photography. The blue thing there. It took 20 seconds to take one picture, really lousy quality. They showed it at the time, 40 years ago. And the CEO went, I don't think so. And they literally scrapped that team. And they completely missed this opportunity. So I believe it's the same thing now. You can resist and say, yeah, well, we'll see all about that. Or you can see it as an incredible market. And that's the third thing I want to talk about, which is to me the most exciting, and I have to rush, is what new business models and opportunities arise from that. And there's a lot I can talk about. Let me just try to skip here a couple. Otherwise, I won't have time. This one is one I like. You know what it is? What's special about this?
Your house?
No. Was it? Yeah, I wish it was. What's that? Solar panels, exactly. This is 100% solar panel. You've heard about it. They're also a bit slower than expect to build it. Again, it's a Tesla thing, and you'll hear them often because I really like how the David disrupts the Goliath. But what they did is take a look at how the market works for tiles, and they just said, yeah, people don't like solar panels. And you can say, yeah, but put them anyway, you're going to save the planet or save some money. Yeah, but I really like my house. And if you don't take this seriously, you know, you lose a huge opportunity. So they designed Quartz-Glass solar panels that are integrated architecturally in the tiles, and when you look from the street level, you see the texture, but when the sun looks at it, they see the solar cell, and you can have an incredible efficiency. You only lose 2% with respect to same roof covered with classical solar panels. And the thing is, when you count everything, it's actually the cheaper solution. So when you build your roof and you have a choice, I'm going to put classic tiles and then cover those nice classic tiles with ugly additional solar panels, for this bad solution, it's going to be more expensive, actually, than just going for the all integrated. Completely disrupting a market in which they were not present at all. And it's a really important thing in the US, because when you hear Trump and he says, you know, America first, well, the one thing he should do is go for solar and renewables. Because when you look at the amount of jobs created in solar, it's actually more than coal, natural gas, and oil together. There's more jobs being created, and we're only at the beginning of this incredible exponential curve. So he should be aware that this is a huge opportunity for a new business model. Another one I really like is here Energiesprong in the Netherlands. I'm going to skip the video. In which existing houses can be upgraded to zero-energy houses in 10 days or a week. And it doesn't cost 1 cent to the users. Why? Because typically these people have an energy bill that's 175 euro per month. They go from a badly performing to an incredibly efficient, literally zero energy and zero cost house. And they continue to pay their 175 euro. But instead of having this to buy energy from the Middle East or from Russia, it goes to the upgrade of their building. And it's completely budget neutral. So people don't have to postpone vacations or hesitate between a new kitchen or making their house zero energy. And it's actually quite brilliant because it works well. They have this website. They have a very simple enrollment procedure. You ask a couple of questions, and you see the projects arising all over the Netherlands. And now they have it in France, Luxembourg, and in the UK as well. I have 5 more minutes. I'm not sure how I'm going to do this. But this is another example for which we can be proud, I think. A new business model again. Umicore was ahead of the curve when they started building this plant, the Umicore battery recycling, years ago already. And now we start to see the market, and it's one of their booming business units within Umicore, in which they look at the waste stream as a source of resources. And you know, we hardly have any electric cars on the road for the moment, but they have deals with all of the producers, and they are going to take back the battery, produce new batteries with 70% less carbon impact than if they were to do this with raw materials. So a very clever thing. And also just economically, again, it makes sense. When you're mining for materials and you go for ore, you know, in an exotic location somewhere around the globe, and you have to process and treat all of that, or you consider what we waste as raw material, as Thomas Ross said, there's a much bigger leverage. You have 200 grams of gold per motherboard, per ton of motherboard, 300 per ton of cell phones. So it's just a clever way of looking at this opportunity. Okay, I'm going to skip the last examples. This is just one incredibly interesting one I want to show about finance. It's called duurzaaminvesteren.nl, in which it's a new business model for financing this energy transition. There's a website, and all of the projects are always sold out, but they say we need $1 million for district heating, or for solar panels for a neighborhood, or for a new windmill, and you can buy your share, and you see the yield, 5.5%, 4.5%, 7%, 6.5%. This is what you get. So regardless what your conviction is, instead of having your money lose money on your savings account, put it to use to finance this energy transition. And you will be implicated. And all of a sudden, the windmills won't be such a nuisance anymore. If you get 6% on your share, all of a sudden, you know, they can be in my backyard, instead of saying not in my backyard. And finally, branding. Oh, I see it's still in Dutch. Making a stronger brand. I want to finish with this one. You know the company? Boring Company? I love the name. The Boring Company, it's a side project of Elon Musk, one of the many. And what he says, what I love about the Boring Company are the low expectations. Nowhere else to go but down. And actually here again, if you're in the transportation business, this might work, this might not work, but it might be really bad news. I want to briefly show that video, and then have 2 closing thoughts. Oops. So you might say, yeah, it's easy to make a nicely rendered video like this, but you know, they're doers. He is a doer. And so what happened, they bought a second-hand boring machine and they started drilling on their location in LA. And now they just had the opportunity, the permit to actually go under LA and try the first of these tunnels. What they want to achieve here is exactly the same as what they did with the solar panels and the cars, is make a quantum leap with respect to what exists now. So they want to make tunnels that are a factor 16 times cheaper per kilometer than what is currently being used in the industry. And all of a sudden, instead of having tunnels as a huge expense, it becomes a real solution. And the reason for this is because we're having more and more dense cities, but still somehow, our cities are in 3D, still somehow we have a 2D transportation networks that's stuck all over the world. So why not go 3D and, you know, instead of ruining our country with roads, use this. I met the guy several times. I'm a big fan of what they do at Tesla. 6 years ago in Milan, there was an event. We talked a long time. And what I want to close off with is you can, you know, see this as, we have to do it. Completely moving off of fossil fuels. But it does not, in my opinion, in any way mean the end of our industrialization or the end of economy or living in caves like 100 years ago. Quite the opposite. I believe it's really the next phase in our economy. It's the modernization of our economy. And we can choose how we look at this. We can say, okay, we're going to resist, or we're going to be part of it. I'm going to skip the last couple of slides. This is what I believe. It's really better to take this as an opportunity and shape it, because otherwise, you know, we'll be investing in the past, we'll be building better analog film, we'll be building better typewriters, and meanwhile, all the small startups will start to challenge us and we'll be completely lost. It's moving from a responsibility mindset to an opportunity mindset. You can do this by setting out a clear, bold vision, by listening what your customers' needs are and try to solve low-carbon, circular solutions for their problems, by looking at the whole system and by you know, doing partnerships. And one way to do this is a 2-degree stress test. Think for yourselves, when I see this roadmap, is my company equipped and is my company on this road to a fossil-free circular economy? And if so, where can I save costs, anticipate risks, create new products, and how can I reinforce my brand in doing so? Thank you for your time, and I really hope that you can look at this from a personal point of view. How can I start this up from your organization? And that hopefully, you know, in a couple of years, we'll be looking back and saying, we are leading in this field as well. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much. No problem. You are a real evangelist. Je voudrais me permettre de raconter quand même, parce qu'il y a des patrons d'entreprise. Vous avez commencé votre société il y a
15 ans déjà.
Il y a 15 ans déjà.
Oui.
Ben, un jour, quand on a eu le plaisir de se rencontrer, Serge de Gheldere disait « Je ne vais pas tenir long feu avec ma société, parce que c'est tellement évident pour les sociétés de prendre ces décisions, et tu es toujours là. »
Oui, hélas.
Mais une vraag, non pas hélas, c'est une opportunité. Parce que personne veut être Kodak dans cette société, maar mijn vraag komt. Ik heb het ingeleid. Je sprak over DME, Colruyt, ING. Heb je die bedrijven inderdaad tot concrete maatregelen geholpen? Hebben deze bedrijven vandaag concrete maatregelen genomen in deze aangelegenheid?
Ja, absoluut. En ik kan daar natuurlijk niet gewoon in detail op ingaan. Sommige sneller dan anderen, sommige meer serieus dan anderen. Maar een aantal van die bedrijven is nu echt resoluut all the way aan het gaan. Die, in het begin, als we met hen begonnen te werken, stonden ze zo op de wip van ja, gaan we dat nu doen of niet? En nu zijn ze gewoon volledig die kaart aan het trekken. En we zullen dat zien. Hopelijk gaan we echt ook bij de pioniers hebben in België, maar er is nog heel veel opportuniteit.
Nog veel succes, nog veel energie. Vous restez avec nous encore un petit quart d'heure?
Oui, bien sûr. S'il y a des questions, s'il y a des gens qui ont des questions, je serai...
Très bien. We hebben nu weer een kwartiertje netwerking waar jij iets kunt gebruiken. Serge de Gheldere blijft nog een kwartiertje bij ons, want hij heeft een drukke agenda. N'hésitez pas à l'accoster pour lui poser les questions. Donc, s'il vous plaît, 4h20, à nouveau dans la salle, 4:20. Dank u wel, Serge.
Bob, dank u wel. Ja, dank u.